Hi, Ray Poynter here, and I'm going to be talking about the shift from CX, from customer experience, to HX, human experience, really starting to think about human centricity. So let's have a look at how we got here and what the market situation is today that faces brands. We have had for some time now product parity. It's very hard to produce a product that is fundamentally better than the products that other people can produce. We are increasingly seeing service parity. Two providers can provide the same level of service if they focus on it. We know what is required, we know what the tools are, we know what the methods are. So increasingly, the lead brands provide that high level of service. The discount brands provide a set level of service. So within a category, within a genre, there's service parity. There is supply chain parity. So we no longer see that it's possible for one company to have much better logistics, much better operations, because we're sourcing from a global market, we're pulling all these things together, and there is parity there too. And there is advertising dollar parity. By and large, the only way for your advertising to be much better than somebody else's is for you to spend more on placing that advertising. It's not about spending more on making better ads. That's obviously important, but it's not the key driver because everybody places their money in the way they think is going to optimize the quality of the ads. No, it's to do with how much your advertising spend is. And the way it's allocated these days is increasingly algorithmic, which means we're seeing parity. If we think about the world and about products, we've been shifting away from products to the experience we have when we use that product. We've been moving away from product centricity to customer centricity. Not thinking about if I build a better mousetrap, people will come, but really focusing on what people want and how they experience it. So we're moving from the customer now to the human. The customer is somebody you only think about when they're buying from you. A viewer is somebody you only think about when they're watching your program. A voter is somebody you only think about when they're voting. The human-centric view really focuses on what the person is like all of the time. This real shift to the experience economy goes back now just over 20 years. And this is the prime work, the seminal work from Pine and Gilmore, The Experience Economy. Started as an article, then a book, and the book has been recently updated. So it's worth having another look at it. And they talk about the fourth evolution of markets. We used to have the agrarian economy. Then we had the industrial economy. And for a couple of hundred years, it was all about manufacturing and products. And of course, we've seen the real shift to service economy. Most Western economies don't focus on manufacturing. They focus on services. But that has been shifting to the experience economy because of all those parities, the supply parity, the product parity, the advertising dollar parity. If you want to make a difference, the experience has to be the difference. And we can see from lots and lots of studies that experienced brands are succeeding. So this was a study that looked at Best Western, where they really created personalities within their brands. And they gave the hotel managers the ability to personalize the experience much more. And they saw a real increase in revenue, and they saw an increase in the Net Promoter Score. Virgin Atlantic turned that around. They had a look at what features people were actually using on airplanes, what was delivering a positive experience. So instead of designing a better flight, based on what engineers and designers and people like that think. They looked at what people wanted and what people were using and saved millions of pounds by taking away the stuff that wasn't wanted. If we look at Forrester, they've done the studies, they've found that CX leaders, the people who are really focusing on customer experience, are growing faster, 17% a year. The CX laggards only growing by 3% a year. Of course, this is pre-COVID, but we expect it to make a comeback very shortly. McKinsey looked at that company valuations. The CX leaders more than 4 times the growth in company value than the CX laggards over 10 years. This stuff makes a real difference. Consequently, and not surprisingly, CX within our research world is really big business. So let's have a look at the X values. When people talk about a tech company is 10x, what sort of things does that mean when we look at CX? So let's start by looking at Ipsos. Ipsos has a turnover of about $2.5 billion. It has a market capitalization of about $1.5 billion. So the market says if you were to buy the whole of Ipsos, it'd be worth about 1.5 billion. Contrast that with Medallia. Ipsos, an enormous research company doing the whole range of research. Medallia really focused on CX. Of course, it does lots of things, but really focused on CX. Its turnover is only about $500 million. Only $500 million. I'd love to have $500 million, but it's a much smaller kettle of fish than Ipsos. But its market capitalization, $4.5 billion. Because people can see that it is delivering in a hotspot, this area of experience. But there are several fundamental mistakes about the way we think about brands and we think about experience when we start from the company. I frequently see people saying, we want to understand the path to purchase, as if there was some absolute process. We go through interest and research and purchase, and it looks so inevitable that we end up with this product. And the mistake about that is that it's thinking that people rotate around brands. We're looking for how can we buy that brand? What is our relationship with that brand? But actually, that's back to front. Brands rotate around people. We need to be really focused on the human and then see where the brands fit in. So if I look at the world from my perspective, closest to me are family and friends, nothing to do with brands and products and experiences. Then my colleagues and my neighbours. And only after that is the area where brands can come into play, where I start talking about my preferences, how I want to experience the world. If I replace that, and hat tip here to my colleague Simon Harrington, I've worked with now in a couple of companies, for this type of perspective, where you think about all of the brands you interact with some of the time. I don't interact with any of these brands all of the time. I go to them when they are relevant, when they float into my space. The rest of the time, they're not there in that space. So this is summed up so well by the American thinker, leader, business consultant, Seth Godin. Don't find customers for your products, find products for your customers. We also see this in another of the hot topics of the moment, design thinking. And who is the strongest voice in design thinking? IDEO. So let's have a look at what they are talking about. And they are really focused on being human-centered approach to innovation, understanding people's needs. And they have this interlocking 3 circles. Desirability. People want this thing. Feasibility. We can make this thing or this service. Viability, we can make a living out of making this service. And where we get all three of those intersecting, that is where we should focus. I think an even better way of thinking about this is to pick up on the concept of Ikigai, but actually make it a brand Ikigai. So here are all the things that people need. And then we add to that the things that we're passionate about and the things that we're good at. So we like doing these things and we're good at doing these things. And then, of course, we add in which things can we make money doing. That is the brand Ikigai. That is where we should be. We should be delivering needs. We should be working in areas where we're good and we have a passion. And of course, we have to be able to make money out of them if we're a business or a corporation. We've seen over the last, over a year now, isn't it? Some wonderful examples of brands focusing on what people need. So with Louis Vuitton, lots and lots of fragrance houses, so the right sort of factories. They made hand sanitizer for free in France to tackle the coronavirus spread. And there were hundreds of brands, whiskey brands, beer brands, all sorts of brands making these sorts of innovations. That is really human-centric. It's not saying what are we good at making, what is our core business. It's adding in what do people need that we can do. I love this bit of passion here from Patagonia. Don't buy this jacket. Their passion is the planet. Fantastic clothes, but they want you to reduce the amount of stuff you use. They want you to repair things. They want you to reuse them and recycle. So if you are going to get a new jacket, make sure you give your old jacket to somebody who hasn't got one, who needs one. Let's not get a cupboard full of new jackets. And that is really thinking about things better. This is a lovely example from Guardian, a financial company, running an empathy lab. Because the people who we are doing business with are usually not like us. And in this empathy lab, they had a variety of stations. So at one of them, they put some elastic bands around people's fingers and got them to try to fill in the forms to get them to understand what it's like when you've got physical inhibitions that make it harder to do that. They had somebody there who wasn't sighted, and he was telling people what it's like to try and open a bank account when you're using a screen reader and things aren't set up properly, or when you go into a branch. So we need to understand people better, and that's all about empathy. So HX I've mentioned, being human-centric. So here are 6 tips for becoming much more human-centric. Obviously, first of all, you have to be interested in people. You can't fake it. You can't decide our business strategy is going to be to pretend to be interested in people. You've got to be interested. You've got to have measurements so you know what you're doing, but it's really important that we don't fall into the slippery route of only being event-driven. So when somebody eats a meal with us, we do an NPS. When somebody purchases something, we do a follow-up survey. That's part of the picture, but actually it doesn't tell you about the whole person. You're not sewing all of these pieces together, and you're not understanding things that didn't happen. And the things that didn't happen could be really important to people. What are people doing when they're not buying your product, when they're not using your product or your services? Find out what the rest of their life entails, because you may be able to help. Give people space to say what's important to them. Now, this is particularly relevant when we have a very fixed discussion, even more so with a survey. We tend to ask the questions that we want the answers to. And of course, that's going to be part of the picture. But there should always be space where people can say, but I'd much rather talk to you about this. This is something that I need to tell you. something that I've been investigating is to do with our research, something we do with people all of the time. Start off with, how are you? Because you know what? If somebody has had a really bad day, then it's likely that they're going to give us a set of feedback on the product, a feedback on the service that's going to be heavily influenced by that. I remember filling in a survey once when I had a terrible toothache. I bet I gave really negative responses to that survey. So understanding how people are today is really going to be useful, I feel. And people change. There are some wonderful papers out there about what happens if you measure things like NPS from the same people for several years. What you will find is it goes up and it goes down. People's lives change, their expectations change. So really focus on longitudinal approaches. And I'm going to give you a very personal example on what I mean by the human experience. So I'm very keen on running. I run cross countries, I run ultra races. I've got a lot of product, including these wonderful shoes here. And it's important to know that the product is right and those sort of things. And then we have the customer experience. So I go for a run. There is my distance, just over 28 miles. It took that long to run it. But actually, the product and the customer experience are there for a reason. And that's the human experience. There I am running with one of my club mates in the national cross-country finals. That is the human element. Everything else is building towards that. Don't focus on how you can make a better watch. Don't focus on how you can make a better shoe. Focus on how you can help me enjoy my life better in the way that I'm doing that. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions.